Hey, good morning, everyone. I'm going to get started here in about 1 minute. I see people are still jumping on, but got as more people trickle in, we'll get started around 10:01. Okay, so thanks everyone for joining today. We are doing the Green Up Events webinar. Um, the idea really came because as we were coming back out of kind of quarantine back in the spring, we were seeing more events come online, and the idea was more than ever, we have to focus on the safety of public spaces and public events when we put everyone in a big space together. So as we consider the safety and social distancing and wearing masks, it's also a good time to kind of press reset on how we consider our footprint at public spaces and events, and how can we come back not only safer but also with waste in mind, and how can we reduce our waste. Because if you go to any event, whether it's a film festival, football game, a wedding, there's a ton of waste, a ton of trash that gets left behind, thrown away in the dumpsters. And it's an opportunity to really take a look at what we're generating at these events, recycle, compost, source reduction, and then also for the people that are attending big events, it's an opportunity to do some outreach. If you can show that composting is important and recycling is important, waste reduction is important, they can take that home with them and remember that what they learned at their green event. So I want to take a look at our next slide here, thanking the folks that are on this call. We have a good mix of panelists from manufacturing and university setting, and also some municipal and local government folks too. And I'll introduce them here in a second. But a big thank you to our sponsors for the CRA. Without sponsorship, we couldn't put on events like this. We couldn't have the conference. We wouldn't have Carolina Recycling Association. So I want to thank Sunoco Recycling and Pratt Recycling, especially as they are our diamond sponsors. And a couple housekeeping items. Everyone's in listen-only mode right now, but this event will be recorded for posterity's sake. And if you have questions for any of the panelists, feel free to pop them in the chat box where it says questions here. You can see this big blue arrow pointing to this red box over here where we're going to have some questions. And at the end of these presentations, here in about 45 minutes to an hour, we're going to grill our panelists and ask them relevant questions that I get from the audience. Also, we want to take a moment to talk about Cra Connect, which is this platform that the CRA has created for our membership. So if you're a member, you have a login and a username for the CRA, and you can log in and network and find recycling markets and talk about what you're doing in your local government or your business. You can look for clients through the CRA's platform. And for instance, we created a social media toolkit about how to put on low waste green events. And so you can find the post in there. And we'll have kind of a summary document that you can use if you have questions afterwards. So it's kind of a one-stop shop to network with other CRA members. We're really excited about it. So before we get into introductions, let's get things started with a quick poll. So what factors do you consider when you choose promotional items and giveaways, especially for big events? Is it recycling, the reusability of the item? Is it made with recycled content? Do you like to see little packaging or shipping waste? Or do you buy straws that come in individual plastic packages? There's, of course, climate impact to consider and the quality and durability of the item. So take a moment, please respond. This will kind of get us thinking about source reduction and recycling. So I'll give everyone about 20 seconds to respond to this. Okay, can we see the results? Survey says. Okay, so recyclability is clearly the most important to folks, followed by recycled content and durability. Great. Want things to last, want them to be able to be recycled. All right. So, by the way, my name is Matt James. I guess I didn't say that. I work for the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality, but I'm also a CRA board member and having a lot of fun doing it. It's something to consider for folks who are active in the CRA. So our panelists today, we have a good mix, like I said. Samantha Yeager is the Solid Waste Superintendent of Columbia, South Carolina. Shannon Culpepper, the Recycling and Education Specialist of Chatham County, North Carolina. Shannon's active in the Triangle, putting on a lot of green events, some of which I've worked for. So Shannon's kind of my former boss for volunteering events. Dave Vandeventer, Recycling Manager, Clemson University, also a CRA board member, and Wes Westbrooks, the Senior Waste Specialist, or is that Senior Waste Czar of BMW? Gotcha. Okay. He's also a CRA board member. So our first speaker is going to be Samantha Yeager, the Solid Waste Superintendent of Columbia, South Carolina, to talk a little bit about preparation for green events. So Sam, if you want to take things away.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you, Matt. I'm excited to be here today, share what we have learned and know and everything here in Columbia, South Carolina. So a little bit about Columbia's operations. Residentially, we serve about 40,000 people. We are home to the University of South Carolina, go Gamecocks. We are also the capital city. And we have a lot going on. If there's a festival for something or something to be celebrated, we celebrate it here. Everything from tiny events that are block parties to our St. Patrick's Day that sees about 50,000 people in our 5 Points area. So I've been with the solid waste division for 7 years now, and we've seen a lot. We've grown a lot. And here's what we've learned. If you can advance to the next slide, Mary. When you have an event, there are definitely major considerations to take in. Now, for Columbia, what we do, the event organizers come to us with, how many attendees there will be, the location, is there other available waste collection options. Our international festival uses our state fairgrounds. They have their own waste collection, so they do all the garbage, but we assist with the recycling, just to be good stewards of the environment and help out our international friends here. So when you look at location and venue, that definitely indicates what kind of, if you use roll carts or if you use clear streams. In that first picture right there, that is actually our international festival at the fairgrounds. They use cardboard boxes with bags, and that's what works best for them. Our St. Patrick's Day festival, we deliver about 300 event carts, but they also utilize the bars and restaurants dumpsters, street litter containers that we have, and other, some restaurants also bring in an extra dumpster, ask for extra service. So it's accommodating the number of attendees. If we have runs or marathons, water stations, you're going to generate a lot less waste and need less containers and less infrastructure there. And also every festival is different. Some festivals have food, some festivals have no food. They have music or setup, breakdown, all of that goes into how we collect things. So what we've learned here in Columbia, we find that garbage roll carts are the best for our festivals, and we pair those with our clear streams, and our clear streams absolutely work so much better when we have signage. So we implemented the signage in the picture on the bottom about 4 years ago, and we've actually gotten a much cleaner feedstock out of our festivals. Most, when it started 7 years ago, when I came, festivals were requesting recycling roll carts. The more you partake in certain beverages, and at St. Patrick's Day, the less you're willing to look at what color the roll cart is. So our roll carts here are blue, our garbage carts are green, and we find that if the roll carts are out there, it's going to be garbage either way. People are just looking for something to put their waste in. But the clear streams are definitely a lot better with controlling what goes in there. Again, I think it's related to the signage. We also have been very successful in twinning the bin, so making sure that there's a clear stream right next to your garbage cart, so you have the option to recycle or recognize where to put, if you have a cup or a can or a food container, recognize where that really needs to go. And if you can advance to the next slide. There's a lot of lessons learned. Every festival is different. Every festival has different volunteers, different organization structures. So the best thing to do is talk. Talk before the festival, talk after the festival, and also you want to make sure you talk to your collection team. Before the event starts, you want to make sure that the organization understands what they need for the number of attendees. Most of them do not understand what or how many carts or clear streams they may need for their number of attendees. After the festival, you want to make sure that everything went smoothly. So talking to those festival organizers, if you didn't get back the number of carts that you delivered, or if something could have gone better, if delivery of those carts, collection of those carts, anything like that. And you also want to talk to your collection staff. We recently had a festival last weekend that did not clean up after themselves, which put, unaccounted for time on our weekend night shift. So building that time into a festival cleanup, into your normal operation, definitely needs to be considered. This festival left bags everywhere. Roll carts were half full. There was unbagged waste. It was not a pleasant cleanup for us. But we do have great partners. Our Greek festival, they actually do their own hauling with a private contractor. They do use roll-offs. It's a 3-day festival, but they partner with us to do their clear streams. So keeping that open communication is really important. Again, learning from each other, learning from the festival organizers and their volunteers to, we don't see everything. They see a lot of what goes on behind the scenes with those festivals. So we like to learn what we can do better and how we can help them and keep our city clean. And then we adapt. So when they do the festival next year, we keep very strict notes on number of carts delivered, number of clear streams delivered, location of those, delivery dates, pickup dates, and then the numbers of returned roll carts, because somehow those do grow legs and find their way to a different part of our city. So we try to keep our equipment as much as we can. I don't think it's ever perfect, which nothing is perfect in life, but we also rely on our excellent volunteers. Our Greek festival recycles about 4 tons every year, and that is solely because of the great volunteers. Logistics and equipment and operations don't work unless you have a good staff and good organizers. So that's the success of Columbia's event recycling. we obviously haven't had that in almost 2 years, so we're excited to see how St. Patrick's Day does 2022. So that is all I have. I know it's very brief, but I will turn it over to Shannon.
Yeah, thanks, Samantha. Yeah, our next speaker, Shannon Culpepper, represents Chatham County, North Carolina.
You can hear me now. Got it. Morning, everyone. Yeah, so I've participated in quote unquote, we'll call it greening events in a lot of different ways, sometimes as a volunteer, sometimes as coordinating the whole green team and waste reduction effort at small events from, just a couple hours, like a lunch event, to a day-long event to multi-day events. So I'm here to talk, oh, sorry, next slide. Thank you. So I'm here to focus on 3 things really. Composting. So if you want to add composting to your event, some advice for how to do that. Talking through a lot of the day of logistics for that, but also just greening practices in general, and then some volunteer management. So these are some folks, including myself and my husband, at Full Frame Film Festival. It's a documentary film festival here in Durham that's about 4 days long and relies on a lot of volunteers for a lot of different things, but we have an awesome green team that helps reduce the waste at that event. Next slide, please. Thank you. So recycling is obviously a great way, you should have it at your event, particularly if there are items that can be recycled. But if you want to go even further in greening your event, then composting is a way to do that. It can seem a little overwhelming. It does take a bit more work than recycling, but let's talk through the steps. So first of all, you'd want to secure your compost vendor. And you're really looking for someone that can provide you carts during your event. Sometimes compost vendors also can provide you volunteers. That's happened as well. But, mostly you're working with someone who can drop the carts off, service the carts, pick them up later. And then working with that vendor, you should be able to determine the number of carts you need for the event, along with the number of pickups and the pickup location. So all of those depend on a couple things. One, the footprint of your event. If it's a large event over many, many blocks, you're probably going to have more than one pickup location. If you have an event that's multiple days, you are going to have probably multiple pickups, and you're going to have to time that out and make sure it's in a location that they can easily get to. If streets are blocked off, obviously they can't get into the middle of the festival to get these carts. You've got to put them somewhere that makes sense. A one-day event's a lot easier, right? You have them dropped off, ideally, the day before if possible, or, many hours before, so you don't have an issue of them coming late, and you have them picked up later. But multi-day events are a lot trickier to figure out. I mentioned that Full Frame Film Festival. It's 4 days long. They have a lot of events, a lot of food. So we actually have a pickup halfway through. They come really early on the 3rd day, so we have all the carts taken to 2 locations, so we don't have to haul the carts that far. It's still, kind of far for some of the carts, but that allows you to not have that food sitting there that long, and then you can just reuse the same carts. And then you really want to also work with your compost vendor to talk about an accepted items list. So while you might know, okay, yes, this is compostable, this is not in general, there might be specific items that your composter isn't willing to take or able to take. Sometimes I've run into certain utensils. So, some compostable utensils are not made the same as others. Some are better than others. And if your composter has a preference on materials, then that's the list you go with, because they're going to be the one taking it for you. And then once you have that list, it's really important to communicate that to the organizers. So sometimes at events, I have direct contact with the food vendors ahead of time, and sometimes I do not. It just depends on my role. Obviously, if I have direct connection to the food vendor, it's easier for me to talk to them. But if not, then I rely on the organizers. I send them the information they need to know to send it to them ahead of time. And that will also help the food vendors potentially be able to buy materials that are compostable. Especially if the event is trying to be as green as possible, then they should, set that as a requirement that the people have to provide things that are compostable. And so you can work with them on different options. I'm always available to the food vendors if they want to talk through, this is what I use, this is compostable. If not, what's something else I could get? And then making your signage. So you can go to the next slide, Mary. So, I have some generic signage that I use, but these are just some examples. So you can see between, each of the sets, there's just slight differences. The composting one, the difference is that the top one has utensils, the bottom one does not. So sometimes events, like I said, have utensils, sometimes they don't. You can always sort of cover up a section of a sign if you're not using those items at that event. But you want to make it very clear what you can and cannot take. Now, you're not going to cover every single thing that you're going to see at an event, but what's important is to think through what you're going to see at that particular event. It might be kind of hard to see, but there's an event that I work with called Farm to Fork. It's an event here in Chatham that is between NC State, partners with farmers and chefs, and they make the world's most delicious food. And people come and eat this delicious food and have music and all this stuff. But it's a really fun event. It's an exclusive event, like in terms of it sells out. They only have a limited number of tickets. So, but their diversion rate is 98% because they require all the materials to be compostable. And so because of that, they actually provide the materials themselves, the organizers of the event. They don't leave it to the food vendors to bring the compostable stuff and have a bunch of different stuff. So they bring it all. And then when people come, you get one fork, one compostable fork, or one set of utensils, and then that's yours to like keep the whole time. Of course, there's extras if you lose yours, but the idea is to cut down on waste by just reusing that one fork, and then at the end it can be composted. So they're making that effort, they're spending the money, they're spending the time to provide that for all of their folks so that the materials can be compostable. So that event in particular, we actually don't have trash cans out anywhere. We only have compost containers everywhere, because ideally that's all you have. Now, some people are going to bring something in randomly, and so we'll deal with that as it comes in, but that's definitely a different kind of event. But not only is it important to have signage on your compost bin or recycle bin, but also on your trash bin or your landfill bin. People are just going to come up and be like deer in the headlights and just look at these things, and they're not going to know. So like trying to help them as best as possible by putting signage on all your containers, or above your containers, wherever they need to go. Next slide, please. So then when you're actually trying to compost at the event, and some of this is, just greening in general, but you're going to want to set up your waste station. So that's what I call them, whether it's compost, recycled trash, or just you're doing recycling trash, whatever it is, I just always call them waste stations. If you can, it's really helpful if you can put those waste stations on the map. So if your event has a map that the public is going to get, asking to put those waste stations on is helpful to you, but it's also really helpful to your volunteers and the people trying to manage the waste to know exactly where they're going to go. Make sure you put out all the signage as soon as you put the cart out. If you put out a cart, Samantha said it before, if you put out a cart, people aren't going to know what it is. They're just going to use it as a trash can. So as soon as you put a cart, you need to put a sign. Don't put the cart and then come back later. You're going to have to just already, decontaminate it. And then, like I said, sometimes I'm directly involved with food vendors and sometimes I'm not. And when I'm not, what I like to do is go to each of them in the morning of the event or at the start of the event and just touch base with them, tell them what we're doing, tell them, what's compostable, what's not compostable that they're serving. And then if they're interested, I will also give them a bucket that they can keep in there, whether it's a food truck table, whatever it is, so that they can compost on the back of the house as well. So really going and touching base with them. It also is like they can help you explain to customers what is compostable if they ask them about it. So it's just really helpful in that way. And then throughout the event, you and your volunteers are just going to be constantly making loops, rounds. You just are going between containers. Maybe your footprint is so large you've divided up that volunteers have a certain section they do, or maybe you do it all. It just depends on the size of your event, but all day long, you're just going to be constantly roaming around these containers, decontaminating them, standing there when people don't know what to do, trying to help them understand convincing them that yes, their cup is compostable or whatever it is when they don't believe you. Yes, all that can go in there. Yes, trust me. So that's what you'll be doing a lot of your time. And then especially in the compost carts, the material it's really fluffy. So you're going to want to be squishing it down to optimize your space regularly, and also decontaminating, of course. So as you're making these rounds, you're helping people, but you're also pulling out stuff that might not have been in there. So you can get it sort of when it's on the top layer and not trying to dig out to the bottom later on. And then after the event, obviously you want to remove all your carts and your signage, but don't forget to get data from your compost vendor. So, you know, if your event is trying to be green, if that's a part of their thing, or, you know, that's part of your thing, you want to be able to tell people how well it went. So making sure you get the data, whether it's weight, number of carts, you can, you know, do the math later, but you want to make sure you have that so you can create a waste diversion report, which would include composting, recycling, if there was reuse, all that kind of stuff. You want to total it up as best you can. Some things are easy to estimate than others. And then, you know, send that out to people, not only your volunteers, but to the event organizers, maybe the food vendors, stuff like that, so that they can see the impact of the efforts. And then thank your volunteers, of course. They are, you know, in these instances, the most important part of your team. You couldn't do it without them, so making sure that they feel valued is really important. So next slide is a list of supplies that you might need. This is not by any means a comprehensive list, but just some stuff over the years that we found helpful. I give volunteers reusable gloves, and so I can just take them home and wash them. But sometimes your volunteer might prefer to have a latex glove, and that's fine. You also might have to come across something gross that you would like to have a latex glove for, and that's fine. You know, do what you need to do for yourself. But mostly we end up using reusable gloves, washing them. And then we also have a bunch of bar towels. Like, I don't know, I have way too many bar towels, and they always come in handy. You can give them to your volunteers. They can use them to clean stuff up. They can just have them available for whatever they need. And also I can just take them home and wash them. Some other stuff, you know, that seems common sense, I won't read to you, but some other things are aprons. So in the bottom picture there is an apron, like if you were a server. They come in really handy for volunteers because they can put their gloves in there when they're not using them. They can put in a little hand sanitizer, their towel, their phone, whatever. It's just a really easy thing to have everything on you. You don't have to have pockets weighing you down, all that kind of stuff. So that comes in really handy. And then some kind of name tag or ID. So a lot of times the organizations or the events I work for give green teams, you know, they have their own shirts because they want people to know that they're allowed to sort of go to places and be behind stuff. So it's a way to designate those volunteers from other volunteers sometimes. But if not, then having name tags so that people understand they're a part of the green team. It's not that weird that they're looking through the trash. This is sort of their job. And then I mentioned the buckets before, and the amount of free 5-gallon buckets I have is like out of control in my office. Well, not my office, my storage building. That would be weird to just be surrounded in my desk by buckets. But I have so many, and they could not come in handy more often. Not only can you use them to decontaminate, so like at the events where I mentioned Farm to Fork, we only have compost bins out. We don't have any other bins available to people. Well, sometimes people bring their own drinks. Sometimes they have something with, you know, a piece of candy. It has a wrapper. We don't actually have a place for it to go for them. So we can have these buckets that we carry around, and we can put the stuff in the buckets that we bring back to sort of our, you know, war zone, or not war zone. That's a very dramatic term. Our sort of location where we're collecting everything. And we can have our own buckets back there, but they're not forward facing for the public. The public can only interact with the compost bins. And also the buckets come in super handy when I mentioned before, when you need to squish down the compost, you can just use that bucket because the carts we use are pretty big. So having that bucket is really helpful. And then you don't actually have to touch it to do it. And so some other things, but just, you know, it's always important to have markers and paper available in case you need to make a last minute sign about a material you weren't aware of and where it needs to go. And then having many kinds of tape, because depending on where you are, you never know where you're going to need to hang these signs up, and you might need to have different kinds of tape so that you don't mess up somebody's, you know, paint or wallpaper or something. Next slide, please. So just a little bit about volunteer management. So most of the events I've, you know, either volunteered at or work do rely on volunteers. If you're in a position where you're able to pay temp workers, that's awesome, and I support that 100%, but most of the time I have to rely on super wonderful volunteers such as Matt James, as he mentioned before. But just taking you through some steps to think about. So when you're creating shifts, just be really thoughtful about it. This work is a little intensive, labor intensive, particularly more than, say, at the film festival. This is not to dog anybody's role, but some people are taking tickets. That's a much different job than walking around constantly, bending over, pulling carts, decontaminating. So you just want to make sure that you are thoughtful about how long these shifts should be. I usually don't do any more than 4 hours. They're usually 2 to 4 hours, depending on the length of the event. And then you develop that job description. So being super honest about how long you're going to be standing, what you're going to be doing. You are going to be digging in trash. You are going to be dealing with compost. If you're not interested in that, then this is not the volunteer position for you. And that's fine. And if you can, consider some incentives. So most of the time these events, like if you volunteer for me, you get to then go to the event. So, that's true of most events, but like I mentioned before, the Farm to Fork one, it sells out every year. So, and the ticket is not cheap, but if you volunteer for half the day for me, then the other half you get to go. So then when I'm making the schedule, which I have later on the list, you can be you can be intentional about making sure that they can come to part of the event and volunteer. So whether that happens first or last, you don't want to have someone shift be, the entire time where they can't just actually go and join themselves. Sometimes, at multiple events, or multi-day events, if you work a certain number of shifts, you get to go to, movies or music, whatever it is, you have a commitment and then you get to do this thing for free. So thinking through what some incentives you might have is really helpful to recruit. And then when you recruit, I tend to have a list of volunteers I go to first that I know understand the job and have an understanding of composting and recycling, and that really does help you, but obviously anybody is welcome. But I do tend to go to that list first. And then fill in from there. And it does depend, like some larger events that I'm just helping out on, they might do all the recruitment and just funnel people to me. I might do it on my own. It really just depends. But, making sure that I try to talk to my volunteers so they really understand the job, because I don't want them to come on not understanding what they signed up for and then bail, because that doesn't help anybody. And then, like I mentioned before about setting the schedule, so just being intentional. And doing it as far in advance as possible so that people can plan, around it, especially if they want to attend other parts of the event. They might want to meet up with their friends or family or something. So making sure you do that well in advance. And then obviously I can't emphasize this more. I said it 3 times, but communicating to your volunteers all the information they need. Where do they park? Where do they meet you? What to wear? What you're going to bring? What they need to bring? Like, as much as you can send them in advance is only helpful to you on the day, so that you don't have to deal with volunteers calling you saying they can't find you, they didn't wear closed-toed shoes, whatever. The more you can communicate in advance, the better. And I think that's my last slide. Well, I have one slide with my information on it, but.
Yeah, thanks, Shannon. Can attest that the volunteer incentive is the bomb. Like Farm to Fork, it's one of my favorite events. Got to work it twice and could not afford a ticket, to be honest.
Yep.
So getting to eat my weight in gourmet food for free after a little bit of work is always worth it. So thank you. Our next speaker is going to be Dave Vandeventer of Clemson University. He's also a CRA board member. He's going to talk a little bit about pride and joy of Clemson University, which is football, and some new aspects of running a green event at a football game, given the current state of the pandemic. All right, Dave.
Thanks, Matt. Good morning, everyone. Excited to be here. What a great opportunity to kind of share what we're doing at Clemson. Thankful for what Shannon and Samantha shared earlier about the details maybe of a smaller event. Obviously, the university football arena is a little bit bigger than some of those other events. We've created a national recognized program through some of our game day recycling challenge kind of our awards we've gotten around that, and just the kind of the buy-in from the university administration and from our fans and from the volunteers that we work with, and most importantly our awesome staff. We couldn't do it without them. But this is kind of the 30,000 foot view of all we do around game day, and how we kind of had some challenges over the last couple of years, as everybody else has, and how we kind of dealt with it, and how we're kind of trying to move forward beyond beyond the pandemic. Let's hopefully it's getting to that place where we can put it behind us. But as you can see, the university demographics is we're 30,000 students plus, and over 80 majors. That's just kind of the quick snapshot of our university. And our game day is, since 2010, has averaged over 80,000 fans. And with those thousands of fans, we bring in lots of waste. As you can see there, average landfill ton per year is about 220 tons, and then another 92 we've been able to recycle that. We couldn't do that without some good infrastructure. So because of the infrastructure we've built at Clemson, we've been able to kind of manage some of that material as it kind of goes from the game day setting into our doorstep at recycling. On a day-to-day basis, we service over 100 buildings. We do source separate. We go after those high-level, low-hanging fruit type items like bottles, cans, paper, cardboard. Those are the basics. And then we do service our campus by a route system, and continue to work on that daily, pretty much, always trying to improve that, make it more efficient and less labor intensive. Processing, we process in a recycling center. It's a mini MRF, over 5,000 square feet of space, and we were able to kind of manage the day-to-day operations of that 1,200 to 1,300 tons per year amount. We actually maxed out at, I think, 1,750 tons in one particular year, but averaging about that 1,300 ton. And then we do have a sorting line. It's a small 6-person sorting line. We have several balers. We have a horizontal baling system that it's about 30 years old. So we're looking to replace that here in the near future. Most of the material we process is market ready. So when it comes out the door, it's ready to go to the next step of the big MRF, and then on to processing facilities for its next life. And then we're been working on here since December of 2020, a new site, still working on some infrastructure issues there. As you can imagine, with a pandemic, it brings on a lot of challenges. We've had some unfortunate events just around buildings, and most importantly, people, which is it causes us to have to step back and look at really what's important here. The other thing we've been able to do is procure some new equipment. It's some used equipment. We have had a significant donation from our partners at Coca-Cola Consolidated. They've had some equipment that they were wanting to not mothball, but be able to use. So we're going to put that to good use here in the near future once we get our new site up and running. So very excited about that. But again, it's one of those things that it's going to take a little bit of time, and hopefully get it done here in the near future. So moving on to our compost facility, which is our next slide there. Yeah, thank you. Clemson also has the backdrop of a compost center. We are managing 17 plus back of the house locations and retail, coffee shops, you name it. We try to get it. If we know there's food being processed there, we try to make sure we capture it. We don't hit every location just because of timing. We're working on some of our catered events. We're starting to build more inroads into some of those items. So that's a good thing moving forward. Processing, so we process on this mini site, we'll say about an acre of land, where yard waste from the university comes, along with wood chips from trees that have been chopped up, and different material like that. So that gives us some good feedstocks to go with our 600 plus tons of food waste. And I'll say, just in the pandemic year last year, that number dropped to about 320 tons. So we weren't producing as much food, obviously. So, that did make our food waste number totals drop. And then we do have some different materials that we are continuing to produce just because of natural causes. We're able to produce some leaf mulch from all the leaves that drop in the fall, and then continue to take some of the material that comes from campus that breaks down and turn that into topsoil. Do some different testing methods there to kind of be our ultimate goal is to be a research institution where we can test some of these other methods like the in-vessel. This summer we processed the peaches that we produce at one of our research peach center on campus. So we processed all of our peaches through that. And then of course the black soldier fly ramps up pretty easily. The flies love the food and they just come back naturally, and we just try to have a landing spot for them there. And it's kind of a natural progression. It's just hard to ramp that up just because of the overall infrastructure that's needed there to make that happen. And then of course, we're working on a forced aeration system that's somewhat man-made, that we've taken some different materials and supplies and made our own process. But day-to-day operations is static pile, forced moving piles in a natural progression with all the PFRPs that we need to do to make that material usable. So next step is branding our product. So we're in the process right now. We've just purchased a piece of equipment and we're going to start bagging our system. We've gotten the green light to bag it and brand it, and that's our brand up in the corner. So we're going to start working farmers markets and local feed and seeds in different locations around the university. We want to keep it a natural local thing, so we're excited about that next thing and trying to just generate some revenue that we can put back into the program and use that as a tool to kind of do that. So we're excited about that. Just kind of, we wouldn't be able to do what we do without those two facilities. And this is kind of some of the, over the 5 years, this is kind of 5-year game day progression of different things we've been able to do since 2016. And we've actually been at this since early 2010, 2011. And then this is just the last 5 years where we've really seen some good jumps in our processes. So you can see 2020 took a big hit. 2019, we actually had some staff. We've had a lot of staff turnover. So we also had to deal with some other issues, climate, with some really hot football games where material turned and went south on us real quick before we could get it to its next place. So, and rain, different things like that. So anyways, that's kind of the backdrop of our program and how we've kind of managed this. So changing up the strategy a little bit for 2021, kind of mid 2020, kind of as things kind of move forward, we started to look at different things and ways we could promote safety around game day and athletics. I took the lead on this and very excited to know that, and how we can work with our partners at athletics and make a difference. So we try to follow in line and just be a good citizen and a good neighbor as well as we do these types of activities. And as you know, as they've changed, so have we, and tried to kind of keep up with their changes. And that this is actually some signage that came out last year, and it's still being used and considered today. So as we kind of look at this move in the next slide here, we can kind of see that it's brought about some other challenges. So this open spaces for debate. So, you know, working in those spaces, people have different opinions about different aspects of that, and you kind of see that throughout some of the game day events, and they're, for the most part though, people are working together and complying. We at our tailgates, we have a tailgate where we promote our recycling program around and do fan engagement. We promote mask usage, disinfecting, different things like that to encourage people to think safely. And we use gloves and try to just consider what that person might do with the material that they're willing to recycle. So just trying to be, again, a good partner, a good citizen around some of our stuff. But again, there is that debate out there of what's happening. Clemson University is an open space for that forum, and obviously our goal is to just be a good citizen and help each other in the process. So what kind of happens after that is, we get into the football aspect of it, and you can see there's been an effect on the stands. This is last year. This is what kind of took place during 2020. People, we did some social distancing within the stadium, and this year we're back to mass full capacity. So this has kind of gone away. And then of course the fans, as you can see in the picture on the right, most fans are willing to wear that mask, because this is the actual Tiger Walk where the players walk into the stadium to get ready for the game. And this is so this is pretty telling. I thought that fans are willing to do their part for the most part, and try to be a difference maker in these spaces. So it's brought about some changes. But people are still willing to comply and kind of work together. So that's kind of how we continue to push and drive our program around those things. So what have we done to kind of adapt to some of these changes? We've basically tried to, as much as possible, use reusable type materials, especially when we're talking about masks. We try to promote a reusable mask whenever possible. We are only accepting material that is not contaminated. We've actually decided that if we see contamination of any kind, especially food that's mixed in with, maybe if it's even Starbucks or a coffee cup or whatever, mixed in some bottles and cans, we'll just decide not to sort that. So we've been trying to be a little bit more careful about what we see. If we see masks and those types of things, we are using we're using litter pickers and obviously gloves and following the CDC guidelines, which is kind of that next slide where we've adapted to the recommendations for waste and recycling handlers. We've looked at the different ways that the CDC recommends, and we're following along these guidelines as best we can in as many situations as we can, and just kind of moving forward with these recommendations in mind. And then of course Clemson University in the next slide has made its own guidelines and following those same in that same track. If we were continue to provide or require masks, and I think the latest mask requirement is up to October 8th, and then there's going to be a new, obviously looking at it again, deciding the next step from there. But it's also requiring weekly testing of all faculty, staff, and students, and also highly recommending vaccinations whenever possible. And then of course this is continuing to happen regularly. We are required to, on a weekly basis, as in my staff, to be tested weekly, so whether we have the vaccination or not. So that's just a requirement now, which everybody's gotten used to it. So it's part of what we do now, and it's the norm for now, and we'll comply. We'll do what we got to do. So, and then of course athletics is kind of places this out in all their spaces, and they kind of are very proactive about warning people and saying, just to allow people to understand that you assume their own risks. And these are some other things that we're doing around some of our spaces in recycling. There's this label down in the left-hand corner that's says, please don't put your mask in this recycling bin, or your gloves and those kind of things. And people have done a pretty good job, but we've really taken that sticker and tried to place it on every recycling container that we can think of, and it's been somewhat effective. I think most people they get it, they're understanding. And of course, the top left-hand corner there, we've got different informational type placards out there that people can look at and make sure that these are in all offices, all locations. This is actually one of the athletics offices. So we're glad that they're being a proactive partner with us as well. So finally, that last slide, I'm just going to kind of talk about this real quick. So our goal this year, and I've used those arrows to kind of show that material goes to that pile. Eventually, on the top and on the bottom, that bottom corner is that's our different recycling bins. The blue one on the left is that's seen in all of our concourse areas. The Coke barrel bin, that one's in many of our suite areas and some of our larger spaces. And then the Slim Jim waste watcher, that one goes in the suite themselves because they're kind of confined and the space is somewhat limited. And then the green one to the very right, that one is out in our tailgate areas. And that one is mechanically sorted every day, or every Sunday after the games. We collect that with this trash truck. It's a rear load. It's trash truck, but it's our recycle truck. We use it for paper during the week. We collect all of our paper 95-gallon bins with this truck during the week, and then on game day weekends we collect all our bottles and cans with it. So it's a versatile tool that we use, and it's been very helpful, where we're trying to minimally touch this material as little as possible. So the big thing for us next is the Florida State game on October 30th. We're going to attempt a zero waste game where we'll put all these practices that I just talked about to use in full effect, and we're going to try to see what we can do to go that next level and minimize the waste that's going to landfill. We've got plenty of volunteers and groups coming out and ready to help us. We'll wear the white hazmat suits, as you can imagine, and we'll be all gloved and masked up. We'll do all those things we need to do to comply. It may be uncomfortable per se, very labor intensive mostly, as you know. If you're in this world, anything around waste is somewhat labor intensive, especially university programs where you don't have the revenue and assets to get that good sorting equipment. But we're going to give it the old college try and do what we got to do to try to get to hopefully a new record for us in some of our game day events. So anyways, that's it for me. If you have questions, I'll be glad to answer them at the end. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Dave. Good to hear from you. So really appreciate that perspective on kind of a huge, large event like a football game. I imagine that's takes a lot of time and thought and energy to prep and plan for, how to manage an incredible amount of waste, tailgate waste. That's a lot of, Bojangles, boxes and all sorts of stuff like that, I imagine. Wes Brooks is the senior waste specialist for BMW. He's a CRA board member also. He's going to talk a little bit about his perspective, working with vendors and managing green events from BMW. So Wes, take it away.
Good morning, all. So hopefully, last but not least, you guys are awake and ready. Next slide, please, Mary. So in case you're all wondering, no, I'm not on drugs. I've just been up at work since about 5 o'clock this morning, and I'm on my 5th cup of coffee, so we're doing good. So to green your event, so we have a thing that we created, and by we, I say me because I'm a department of one here at BMW, but it's called Pillars for a Successful Event. Planning and communication, which is very simple, clear goals in mind. Know your audience, who's going to be attending, and a caveat to who's going to be attending is are there vendors you could possibly use to help you? And I'll explain that in a second. Know your goals. What is it do you want to achieve? Aim small, miss small, as they say. So start small with something you can obtain and reach, measure it, and then you keep applying it year after year. We do this because we want to track the data. We want measurables. I have stakeholders, usually it's a vendor or a supplier that I've bought into something. So I want to give them back some data, some useful data. And last, of course, not least, is what I said, support and buy-in. Critical that you communicate well. So if you go to the next slide, get started, make a plan. Woohoo! So keep it simple. It's very okay to start small. We all have these great grand ideas of, zero waste right off the bat, and 5 seconds in, you realize you're sinking. So don't set yourself up for failure. That's a no. What is a positive is you want to educate and empower, communicate. Signage goes a long way, truly long way. Keep it very simple. Empower the attendees to the point where you're selling the event, but you're also selling what you're doing. You want to make it known that it's okay to have the recycle signs up, this goes there, that goes here, but have them buy into the event by explaining that it's a charity event that's going to benefit the environment, it's going to benefit some other organization. By recycling and doing all these things, you have become a partner to the end result. Capitalize on things you already do. So wherever you're working, whatever you're doing, you already have an avenue and access, i.e. the Carolina Recycling Association. Capitalize on what you know. So utensils that can be recycled or, reused. So have giveaways. That way, in this lovely pandemic we're in, they have no reason not to clip it to their belt, keep it with them. And during a pandemic, what better way to push reusables? Control what you can control. What you're not going to control are the people who believe that there's no global warming and they shouldn't recycle. What you can control is what you're trying to achieve. Signage helps, that is key. Having volunteers positioned at key locations to help direct traffic. But the key here is that they can't step out of their bounds. They're not a recycling police or, recycling Nazi, how we're going to call that. You just want to be very careful in your volunteers and where you place them. Again, you can only control so much. People will only do what you ask them to do. Cattle prods work, but they tend to frown upon that here in the city of Greenville. Trank darts are no. They do leave a slight bruise, so don't do that. Tell people and solicit feedback. Have some coordinators walking around during your event. Have them speaking, talking to the people during the event and get their feedback. Some may give you some helpful tips that you can capitalize on for the next event. That's key because so often we get so focused at tunnel vision on what we want to achieve for this event that we may miss some of the smaller avenues that somebody that's not in our arena may actually think of. Self-assessment based on your effort. Again, data, because in my line here, I utilize and I love to capitalize with my sponsors. I leverage what they can do for me to possibly take away a recyclable or waste stream, composting, in exchange for advertising. Cuts my cost down, increases my signage, and it's something that they can buy into. They're now feeding their social responsibility bottom line. Coordinating early. I cannot say this enough. I don't care what you're doing. Start early enough to give yourself time to align everything you need to align. We use something we call procurement strategies. So be it a recycler, a hauler, I try to solicit those people to help pay for my events because my budgets are usually low key from the internal standpoint. But then we have the externals that I do that are really high key, or as we call it, South high cotton. I'm learning. So if you go to the next slide, Mary, all of what I just said culminated to this. So this year in 2021, we took the BMW Pro-Am Charity Golf Tournament green. We had a plan to actually just start small, but thanks to the pandemic in 2020 and the event being postponed, it gave me a year to kind of strong arm some of our vendors, my clientele, local organizations. It helped us create a sustainable village. And until 100% of our material that was generated at the golf tournament did not go to a landfill. Now, the caveat was they were not, all things were not recyclable. We did create an all aluminum cup with the lovely Rondell logo on it that was reusable. So another way to push the idea of reusable containers during the pandemic. Give them a commemorative cup, or again, shameless plug, utensils that they can keep, not just for your event, but for another event. You want to make them understand that there's buy-in. Now, for those picky people who want to rinse or whatever, we created water stations and paper towel stations. They could rinse off any residue from one item and then, put it back in a little pouch for the next event. Same thing for the cups. They were aluminum cups, nice little branding on them. I would have brought a sample in, but I'm out. But anyway, those cups, if they kept those cups and took them back to a beer cart, they got a discount off of their refill because we couldn't do free, but a discount's better than nothing. So again, you're really empowering the attendee to buy in to what you're selling. And if you give them something as a freebie that's commemorative or can be reused again, that's what you want to do. The tournament was a huge success. We had a ton of data that came out of that. We're still actually sifting through some items. We want to clarify some things. I've got some stakeholders that actually donated lots of money and time. So we're going to meet with those guys in the next couple of weeks and get ready set for the next event. So next, please. Now, know your goals. I put this in here, and this is probably the most boring slide known to mankind. But do you know what you want to achieve? It's a very basic question, but surely you do. Sometimes we start, we get in the middle of planning, and we forget what we wanted at the beginning, in the middle. What materials will you target for recycling? Where are you going to start first? Paper, plastic, metal? Or are you going to do composting, paper, plastic? Or are you only do paper and plastic? Pick your poison, but start somewhere. Depending upon your volunteer setup or your support group, you determine how big you want to go. I'm a big believer in go big or go home, but in the recycling world, when you're trying a greening event, you have to kind of know your attendees, know who's going to attend, and not to say this poorly, but know their level of participation. Will they at least recycle a plastic bottle or a metal container or something of that nature? Is it an established outlet or do you need to locate? So meaning, do you have contacts that can haul away your material, your paper, your plastics, your metals, your composting, or do you need to create those associations? Find someone, a partner that can perhaps help you sponsor the event, because now you've got signage, you've got branding, and you've got a nice partner to buy into all this. Who will assist in collecting material? As one of the other panelists spoke, volunteers are key. Having a sound strategy so the containers are easily accessible. Having volunteers, if the containers are not accessible, to roll them to that pickup point and take them back to the destination. These are things that we harp on here at BMW, and it's probably one of my biggest headaches. because the last minute Murphy's Law will hit, something will go awry, and you're having to scramble in the middle. But plan for that contingency. Chances are you're going to need it, but that's always key. Will data be quantified and shared? Yes, yes, and yes. Speak with data. The more data you have, the better you'll prepare yourself for lessons learned for the next event. Data is key, especially if you have stakeholders that really want to know, is it worth it? Did we get our bang for our buck? If you got a sponsor, they want to know these things. So be prepared. Have some volunteers set aside to try to quantify as much as you possibly can. Some things, if you can't weigh it, educated guess goes a long way. You never really want to over-exaggerate your data, but try to have it as true as possible. And your results. You know how well you have done, one, by your data, and two, by the overall response from the participants. Going back a few slides, again, have those people kind of work the crowd, talk it up during the event, walk around, hey, how you doing? You recycling? Great job. Hey, good job on that. You want to get out there. You want to make it not just so stagnant, because let's face it, recycling has been around for many, many years, and we're trying to educate and empower a whole new generation. So I hate the phrase press the flesh, so to speak, but you got to get out there and you got to make what you're doing important to the participants during the event, not before, not after, because before you played it up, during is what you're looking for is that result, because after it's too late. So next slide, please. Now for the wonderful support. You need to make sure you have enough staff or team members to, one, help communicate the event. Always key. Answer any questions. Make sure your support group, those volunteers, know exactly why you're recycling paper, plastic, metal. Where are you sending it to? What's going to happen to it? That kind of thing. Monitor recycling stations. Those volunteers are key. Help with the end activities, which I've already kind of spoken on as well. Then troubleshoot as the unknowns pop up. That's where having key staff in place will help, because again, Murphy's Law is always going to be there. So always count on that. Have a backup to the backup to the backup, and you, my friends, will be successful. And I believe that's my last slide. Whoo! So.
Thanks, Wes. Yeah, so one member of the audience asked, we'll get to a poll here in a second, but asked, very interested how to push reusable containers safely in a pandemic. And thanks for addressing that question. And I think Shannon also touched on that, because the answer really is provide free stuff to people and at discounted rates, and people will participate and will use reusables, obviously.
Right.
Better in a
Yeah,
pandemic.
you'll be amazed, Matt, that if you offer that freebie, that giveaway, if it's commemorative marking your event, and then you explain to them why you're giving it to them, you'll be amazed that many will buy into that, at least over 75%, which is way better than the curve.
Absolutely. Well, thanks, Wes. We're going to get to audience questions here in a second. We have a few good ones. But first, let's take a quick poll to get thinking about this stuff. So what factor is most valuable to making event recycling easy for participants and successful for event coordinators? So things like several of these were touched on in these presentations, from clear and concise labeling, joining the bins, putting recycling with trash so they don't get contaminated, put compost next to them, universal container colors. Typically blue would be recycling, brown would be garbage. Monitors at disposal stations, working with volunteers, having limited openings. So yeah, take another 15 seconds to answer that, and we'll look at the results. And in the meantime, if you haven't already, if you have a question for any of our panelists, please feel free to put it into the question box, and we'll be sifting through them and asking them to our panelists here in a second. All right, let's take a look at these results. Okay, yeah, that's my choice too. Clear and concise labeling, super important. I think it's a best practice to use signage that's got more pictures than words. that really can be seen kind of first glance really easily to understand what goes in the correct bin. So it's definitely best practice. Now I'll ask our panelists if they want to show their videos. We're going to go through a few questions. The first one I saw was a general ask to share any insights specific to waste resulting from increased safety protocols. So in my mind, we had two panelists kind of talk about this. Yeah, Dave, at football games, do you have any ideas of what's going to happen with, people are going to be bringing disposable masks, hand sanitizer, things like that, we see now in the pandemic? Is there any good strategy, best practice to manage those materials or educate about what to do about those?
We have not scaled that wall yet. I believe that we will probably try to, again, follow the CDC guidelines that I had mentioned earlier in that slide. We'll try to focus on to protect the staff as much as possible in those situations where we can, just do the proper protocols and protect ourselves. Again, promoting a reusable mask, I think, is one way to go. And also the large volume pump hand sanitizer type stations. I see a lot of that. See the automatic, the battery operated, swipe your hand underneath it, sanitizers, that type of thing. Keeping doors held open as much as possible. I know there's no more ticket. Everything's mobile now. Matter of fact, if you don't have a mobile ticket, you're not getting into the game. So those are some things that are kind of happening right now, and it's caused some bottlenecks. People are starting to work through some of that, though. But from a waste collection standpoint, we're just going to protect our staff and our volunteers on the best we know how. We're not, obviously everyone has the right to refuse, and we're not going to hold that against anyone. So we'll do the best we can, and just leave and take it from there. So
yeah, sure. And something we saw in your presentation was the labels that Clemson created about don't recycle your mask, it's not recyclable. I think masks are the newest item that has fallen victim to wish cycling. People want to think that it's recyclable. It's not. And my advice would be, if you want your mask to be greener, use it over and over again, or find a reusable mask. And I had a question for Samantha, kind of related to that. You said you did an event last week, I believe. Did you see, were there a lot of masks contaminating the clear streams you put out? Were people following protocol pretty well about using disposable things like that?
That event did not choose to recycle, but just generally, we do see more masks, especially in our street sweepers. So our street sweepers work our Main Street hospitality districts every night, and we see more and more masks in our bins when we empty those. So it's an overall increase.
Absolutely.
Litter, wish cycling.
Yeah. So kind of touching on that, a question to Shannon would be, I think you mentioned one of the tasks of the volunteers is to monitor the carts, what's going in them. How often do volunteers have to dig out something that's a contaminant? Is that something that frequently happens at events like this?
Yeah, it's pretty frequent. I mean, it's helpful when you can, depending on the event, if you can sort of as a volunteer just be near the container, because then you can just help people get it in there. But pretty regularly, you're going to have to be putting stuff from one bin to the other, taking it out. People just, like we say, like they're you can have all the signs in the world, right? They're not going to read them or believe you. And they're not going to believe that this thing they're holding can go in this bin or whatever, or they don't care and they don't read the sign and they just look for a card. So, you know, Samantha mentioned it, but having different kinds of carts is also important, like a traditional cart, you know, versus the Clearstream versus something that's like distinguishing them is helpful, but you can't always do that. Like sometimes you're just using the containers that are at the event you're at. So, you know, expect to be taking stuff out of there, you know, pretty regularly, but that's why if you're making the rounds, you can get it pretty quickly before, like if there's one cup in, like a solo cup in there, you can get it out quickly before you get like 10 more because people see their cups in there, you know, so you're just going to expect to be constantly sort of decontaminating.
Absolutely. And I noticed on your slides, one of the supplies you mentioned is one of those grabbers, whatever that's called.
Yeah.
I guess that's the technical term for it. But that helps take out any contaminants at the bottom of a van. You don't want to go.
Yeah. Some of the carts we get are pretty big. They're hard to reach down when you're, you know, not a very tall person.
I understand that for sure. Okay. So another audience question was that they would love to hear tips on working with vendors and manufacturers that package everything in plastic. So you're getting a bunch of utensils and they're all wrapped in plastic. What's the point? So Wes, I see you laughing about that. Do you have any tips for this asker?
Cattle prod, baby, cattle prod. It's every time. No, we plastic wrappers. We actually set up a container just for those because we actually can recycle that material. So, or what you can do is talk to your vendors and try to get again, see if they'll give out something commemorative, or use a packaging material that can be easily recycled for them. We've had one event here recently where we put compostable utensils inside of a reusable cup and set it out, and instead of wrapping it with plastic or shrink wrap, we actually just had it like a little paper bag. So the bag ended up being their portable waste container that they empty into a bigger container later. And the cups were usable as well. The material, the utensils were compostable. So the key is talking to people early on enough, communicating the importance of what you're trying to do, and then making sure up until the event that they follow through on their commitment.
Perfect. Thanks, Wes. Great to see a couple more questions coming in. This is kind of a general one, maybe for Dave, who works kind of bigger events. But how do you manage recruiting volunteers at free public events when there is no ticket cost incentive? I believe you probably work with a lot of students, Dave. How do you get them to volunteer at events?
So we have a program with one of our partner sponsors for game day. We use donation dollars. So we donate back to clubs a nominal amount. So if we get so many volunteers, we tell them, you know, if you get so many volunteers, you'll get this much. And we do prorate it a little bit if they don't get the volunteers, or we tell them, you don't have the volunteers show up, that means you got to do more work, you know, that kind of thing. So it's a little bit of a trade-off. There's a little financial incentive. We do have some worker passes that we use as well. We have a small amount that we use for stadium volunteers. We have 6 different locations throughout the stadium that we ask our volunteers to roam per se, and kind of keep an eye on things, suite areas, concourse areas, and that type of thing. So that's a little bit of the ticket is, you know, worker pass is a little bit of incentive. You know, we feed them. You know, they can go to any of the nicer venues to eat if there's, you know, that opportunity. So that's a little bit of a carrot, if you will. So those are some of the things we do. And we give everyone a T-shirt. You know, they'll get a recycled material T-shirt as part of coming out and helping us. So those are some of the things we try to do. It's been challenging this year more than ever. This has been probably our most challenging year to get volunteers out that we've seen. But we just keep trying. We're not going to give up. So just don't give up.
Yeah, Thanks, Dave. Sounds like common theme is free giveaways are a great incentive for both attendees and volunteers. Everyone likes cheap stuff, no doubt. And so a common theme we've heard throughout the presentations, and we're going to wrap things up here in a second, but a common theme we've heard is the importance of data collection and seeing, tonnages and pounds of material that we get, what types of things are recycled and thrown away to improve our events in the future. So kind of an open question to all of our panelists. Why is data important to collect, and how do you change future events based on what you've seen in the past?
Well, I kind of, yeah, go ahead, Wes.
Well, the first part of the question, why is data important? Is that it correct?
Absolutely.
Okay, Matt James. It's important on many levels. One, you need to know if your event achieved your goal. Secondly, if you have stakeholders, sponsors, or someone promoting signage or whatever, they want to know. You want to feed that back to them, because your goal, at least my goal, is to get them to buy in again next year and the year after, and to tell a business partner who has another business they can buy in as well. So that's very key. And what was the other part of your question? I'm sorry, I have short-term memory loss.
Do you use data to kind of inform the way you plan your next event?
Yes, that all goes part of your lessons learned. I think Shannon or Sam had a pretty good slide about that, but lessons learned is key to anything that we do here. Because again, you don't want to repeat the failures of the past. You want to capitalize on things you know didn't go well, back up and punt, that kind of deal. I noticed somebody, or maybe it was you, Matt, talked about on the signage. Yeah, it was on the poll question. Central color signage. Well, there are people like me that don't see color, so you have to make sure, for us colorblind folk, we don't care about color. We want clear, concise signage. Nice symbols plays a big part. Universal colors are great, but you got to play to your audience. I think having all that information from one year to the next as a lessons learned, it all goes back into the data you're collecting. Hopefully to improve your event from one to the next. Go ahead, Dave, take it away.
Yeah, I was just going to say the data that we collect it incentivizes our staff. A lot of times, we're trying to achieve a goal from year to year, and it kind of it kind of tells them the story of how kind of how we did as a group. There's no, and again, there's no bad day, there's no bad data. It's a measuring stick, see where we're at. Obviously the costs are, costs are part of that, I think, as well. You want to make sure you're not going crazy. And I'll use the example in 2016, we sorted every piece of recycling that we could get our hands on, but it was so labor intensive. We spent tens of thousands of dollars on labor that year. The following year, we achieved our goal of a certain amount of tonnage we were going after for the year. And then in 2017, we decided not to do that and just to pull out the significant waste like tablecloths and large plastic flexible packaging and those types of things, and get down to the organics and the bottles and the cans and the paper and the cardboard and the stuff, the meaningful stuff. And we were able to achieve about the same. Actually, we were able to recycle more without the labor costs, but we weren't as intentional about source separating. So we're more of a dirty MRF, a single stream type mix. So, but we still achieved our goals. We still had minimal contamination. So, it told our staff that this is achievable either way. And from a financial perspective, we were able to kind of see that difference as well. But now we just it's just something we realize it. Then we're like you said, we hit the restart button. So we feel like we're in a new space now. So we've got some new challenges, but also at the same time, new goals, new opportunities, new ways of looking at things.
Thanks, Dave. So kind of got one final question, and I'll give this one to Sam. You know, in Columbia, do you have is your program, do you advertise this availability of your clear streams and your carts? How would a event organizer find out about this? How do they find out about you?
So we have hospitality tax and accommodations tax funding that fund some of these festivals, and we put it on the application.
Yeah.
Also, when they do their event or parade permit with the police department, it's there as well. But we don't have it on our website because we only do public events.
Mhm.
So if it's like on a private property, you know, wedding, one of our urban farm has a lot of farm to table events, which is kind of we consider a more private event. So we just put it on those public funding applications.
Awesome. Seems super efficient. So kind of to wrap things up, I want to thank Shannon, Dave, Wes, and Samantha. Fantastic information. We've got a lot of compliments in the chat about the usefulness of this info, and people plan to use it. So I think with these webinars the CRA puts on, an important takeaway is not just what you learned here in these presentations, but now you have 4 resources of 4 different speakers that have a lot of information about how to manage green events. So if you have questions, we have their contact information. We can help you bug them about how to put on these events. Obviously, when they have time. But yeah, I wanted to thank you all. Great resources for the future, and we'll be putting out a summary document about kind of the findings that we've seen in this presentation. So the other big takeaway is the importance of safety. With COVID, we have to put a lens on how to have safe events where people are going to have a good time, but they're going to leave in as good a health as they arrived. So as we're considering that and making sure we're following the right protocols, following the right mandates, we just think this is a good time to also consider reducing our footprint. So big takeaway is importance of safety. And of course, free stuff. That's the other thing. Data and free stuff does wonders. Last thing I'll mention is a quick plug for a program that we have through North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality. My colleague Tom Rhodes runs the NC Green Travel program, where it's a recognition program for event spaces, businesses, hotels, restaurants that follow best practices for recycling and composting. And so if you are looking to have an event that is both safe and following recycling and composting best practices, you can go to www.ncgreentravel.org. And there's a good list of folks that are doing this work. So with that, you know, you can find the recording of this webinar on our website on CRA.com.org, and I believe that it will also be posted on Cra Connect. So another good reason to get on the platform. Thanks again to everyone for joining, and thanks to our panelists. Hope everyone has a great day. Good week.
Thanks all. Thanks, Matt.
Bye, everybody.